Week 3 of the fantasy football season. Here's tight end starts at every matchup this week, Thursday night. Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Darren Waller, they traded for him, got him out of retirement in the offseason. He hasn't played a game yet. And even if he plays, he's not going to be in shape up to snuff with the playbook as well as Darren Waller. And he's a sit. Anacona, he's been filling in for Waller since he's been out with injury. But obviously, he hasn't seen many targets. Hasn't done much. He's an easy sit. Dalton Kincaid to start this week. A good matchup in this one versus the Miami Dolphins. They can't stop anything. Dalton Kincaid, week 1, he had a nice game, 4 for 48 and a touchdown. And last week, 7.70 fantasy points. So this week, where Kincaid, he's been a consistent option the first couple weeks in this offense, where guys like Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman had one good game and a bad game. I think Kincaid on Thursday night goes out there, has a good game. Cincinnati Bengals at the Minnesota Vikings. Now with Joe Burrow out of the lineup, especially these two tight ends, Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, I don't see them really being options in the passing game for the Cincinnati Bengal team or being fantasy options. Still going to be third, fourth options behind Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, and Jake Browning. He's a quarterback as well He's a quarterback that comes in and he's aggressive and he tries to get the football to his playmakers. So, like I said, the tight end position in Cincinnati the last 3 or 4 years hasn't really been relevant for fantasy football. TJ Hawkinson, a fringe option. He's not looking as quick. He's not getting in his cuts as quick as well as Hawkinson. And maybe this quarterback change could help, obviously, this Viking team where McCarthy wasn't as aggressive and not accurate, where Carson Wentz, he's an aggressive and he's a gunslinger, which is good at times and obviously bad at times. But TJ Hawkinson, 2 ball games so far where he hasn't done much. So this week, to me, he's a fringe option. Houston Texans at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Dalton Schultz, many people thought he could step in and be the number 2 option in this passing game, but no one's done anything over there in Houston besides Nico Collins and Nick Chubb. No one's been a fantasy option in the first 2 weeks. So this week, even in a good matchup at the Jaguars, he's a sit. Brenton Strange a sit as well. Trevor Lawrence, he more targets the running backs and the receivers for this Jacksonville Jaguar team in the William Cohen offense. Even last season where Cohen was with Tampa Bay, K-Don, he only had a couple good games here and there. So like I said, first they got to get Thomas Jr. and obviously Hunter on track. And Brenton Strange, he's nothing more than the 4th or 5th option in this offense. And this week he's a sit. Indianapolis Colts at the Tennessee Titans. Tyler Warren, already one of the better tight ends in fantasy football. High draft pick in the NFL draft this season, 14th overall. And he had a good career in Michigan, and it's continuing in the NFL. So this week in a good matchup at Tennessee, he's a must-start. Chika Kwango, we haven't seen much out of him over the last few seasons. He's a tight end that definitely had some upside, but he never put it all together. And he's a sit this week, even in a mediocre matchup versus Indianapolis. Vegas Raiders at the Washington Commanders. Brock Bowers a start. Obviously not 100%. That Monday night game, he was hobbling. And Geno Smith missed some throws to Brock Bowers as well. But he's a talented tight end to run all the routes. He's a matchup problem. And even not 100%, I think this week at Washington, he bounces back and has a good game. Zach Ertz to start. And now even if Marcus Mariota is going to be the starting quarterback in this game, Zach Ertz, he's a tight end that makes things happen. He gets open with IQ and good technique and footwork is Zach Ertz. And he's been the number 2 option in this passing game this season, where Terry McLaurin has taken a little bit of a back seat with Debo being the number 1 option and Ertz being number 2. And 2 weeks in a row, he's found the end zone to begin the season. Los Angeles Rams at the Philadelphia Eagles. Tyler Higbee, Davis Allen. I know last week they had some decent games, but these guys are the 4th options at best in this offense, where you got Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, and Kyron Williams out of the backfield. And the other thing is Davis Allen, he does have 2 touchdowns this season, but he only has 3 catches on the year. So like I said, it's not going to continue. It's not sustainable, and they're both sits. Now to the Eagles, Dallas Goedert in this last week's game at the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll see if he returns in this one. Is Dallas Goedert. And if he plays, he's a start at the tight end position. And obviously, if you don't, Grant Caltera and Kylan Granson are going to step into the starting lineup where they're not going to be options. Obviously, with guys like Saquon Barkley, Hurts, where he runs the football a lot, and also A.J. Brown, even though he's struggling, and Devonta Smith. If Goedert's not in this ball game, those 2 tight ends aren't options in a potential high-scoring game. Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. Kyle Pitts a fringe option. I know the first 2 weeks of the season, he's turned the corner a little bit as Kyle Pitts. And we know a young quarterback like Michael Penix, security blanket, is always obviously the tight end position and best friend in big situations. But Kyle Pitts, how many chances has he got over the years. I know it's been some bad offensive coordinators and some bad quarterback play over there in Atlanta, but guys like Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and even to an extent Darnell Mooney are going to get theirs before, obviously, Kyle Pitts does. So like I said, Pitts, he's had 2 solid games in the early going. But for me, going into this week, even in a good matchup, he's a fringe option. Jatavian Sanders is a sit. Last week, though, he had a good game. 7 catches, 54 yards on 9 targets. Definitely someone to keep an eye on is Sanders, but we got to see more consistency. I know he was a good prospect out of college coming in as Sanders, but this offense has been erratic over the last couple of years, and pretty much the only players that are fantasy options to me is Chuba Hubbard and Tedora McMillan right now. But Jatavian Sanders, if he could put a couple games together, then maybe he could be an option down the line this year. Pittsburgh Steelers at the Patriots, Jonnu Smith, Pat Freiermuth, the both sits. We know Aaron Rodgers really hasn't used the tight end position consistently over the last few seasons, going back obviously to his Packer days. Then with the New York Jets, nothing was going. Tyler Conklin had a good game here and there once in a while, and even now the first 2 weeks he really hasn't used the tight end position with the Steelers team. I know Jonnu Smith, he found the end zone in week 1 at the New York Jets, but last week both these players didn't do much, and the upside in this offense isn't great as well, besides DK Metcalf more weeks than not for the Steelers. So Smith and Freiermuth sits. Hunter Henry a fringe option. Last week he didn't do anything. Is Hunter Henry. And Drake May, he's becoming that quarterback that spreads the football out, and every week it's someone different who's going to go out there and put up fantasy points. So this week, not in a great matchup as well versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. At best, Hunter Henry's a fringe option because it could be one good game and one bad game like last week where you don't show up. So consistency hasn't been there. Green Bay Packers at the Cleveland Browns, Tucker Kraft, a start for me in this game. He could be a number 1 option easily in this passing game for this Green Bay Packer team, and it looks like it's starting to turn that way right now for Tucker Kraft. And he could be a top 3-4 tight end weekly as well, where the position has taken a turn a little bit. Brock Bowers, he's banged up, not 100%. Trey McBride, he's been solid, no doubt about it. But after that, it's pretty much wide open at the tight end position. Who could be that number 3 or 4 guy this season? So this week in a good matchup at Cleveland, he's obviously a must-start. David Njoku, Harold Fannin Jr., both starts in this game. Tight end has been a little weak this season. And both these guys, they're getting a lot of snaps, and they're on a team that's going to be trailing once again this week, where they've been trailing early and often all season long to begin the year. So Njoku, we know he's a freak athlete. He could go out there and make plays, and he runs like a wide receiver. And Harold Fannin's playing a lot of snaps and a good prospect coming out of college as well. So this week, once again, both these tight ends to me are starting options where the position is weakened a little bit over the last couple weeks with injuries and poor play. New York Jets at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Mason Taylor. Maybe in the future he could be an option, but we haven't seen much out of the rookie in the first 2 weeks of the season. And I've always said this in videos, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, the only playmakers that are fantasy options in this offense. Cade Otton, a sit. Otton, he's just 4th, 5th option in the offense, obviously, so he's not going to see the ball. Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, Bucky Irvin, Rashad White, Sterling Shepard even getting some work, so he's a sit in this one. Denver Broncos at the Los Angeles Chargers. Evan Ingram was a nice offseason signing, but it hasn't translated in the first 2 weeks here. And Ingram's not 100% as well, where he was banged up with a calf injury going into week 2. So right now, Ingram in a tough matchup as well versus a good defense of the Los Angeles Chargers. I can't trust him because he's not playing a lot of snaps and not getting a lot of targets. He's a sit. Tyler Conklin, Will Disley a sits. I know this offense, they're throwing a whole lot, spreading defenses out, but it's a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. And Justin Herbert, he really hasn't targeted in the tight end position consistently throughout his NFL career. So like I said, Tyler Conklin, Will Disley, they're just more blocking guys and guys who will run routes but not get many targets in their sits, especially in a matchup versus a good defense. New Orleans Saints at the Seattle Seahawks, Juwan Johnson, one of the better tight ends to begin the season. And Spencer Rattler, a young quarterback, he's going to target that tight end position, especially in the red zone and on key third downs. So Juwan Johnson, you don't have to worry about Taysom Hill taking snaps at his position where he's going to be out majority of the season. And Johnson's going out there playing good football and 2 weeks in a row with 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. So this week in a matchup at Seattle where they'll be trailing, he's a start. Elijah Arroyo, AJ Bonner are sits. Arroyo hasn't done much so far in the early going of his NFL career as the rookie. And AJ Bonner did find the end zone last week, but this offense is built around obviously Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, Smith-Njigba, and Cooper Kupp are the top guys in this offense, where the tight end position as well over the last few seasons in Seattle really hasn't been utilized in a fantasy option. Dallas Cowboys at the Chicago Bears. Jake Ferguson had a big game last week where him and Dak Prescott, especially versus the New York Giants over the last few seasons, have gone out there and had big games. So Ferguson, he's healthy. He got a nice contract extension before training camp, and him and Dak have always had a good rapport. So this week, in another potential high-scoring game, I like Ferguson at the Bears as a start. Cole Kmet, Colston Loveland, even in a good matchup. Can't trust these two tight ends. They didn't do much the first 2 weeks of the season. And you would think with high draft capital taking Loveland 10th overall, he'll get more snaps and more route participation. But obviously that hasn't been the case. And Caleb Williams, the only guy he can consistently hit in this offense has been Rome Odunze this season. So this week, even in a good matchup, both these tight ends are sits. Arizona Cardinals at the San Francisco 49ers. Trey McBride is start. One of the best tight ends in the league. Him and Brock Bowers coming into the year with the top two options. McBride, number one option in his offense, could run all the routes, has a big playability, yard after catch guy. And this week in a matchup with the Niners, a team very familiar with in division, he's a must start. Now with George Kittle out, Jake Tongs, Luke Farrell have filled in. Tongs, he's made a couple plays. Touchdown in week one last week, had 4 catches, but the upside really isn't there. Even with Mac Jones in there, quarterback, working with these guys on the second team, he's a sit. And Luke Farrell, he only had the 1 catch and found the end zone. He's a sit where these guys are more decoys running around. They want to get the ball to guys like Ricky Pearsall and Jennings in the receiving game, and also McCaffrey out of the backfield catching the football. Now Sunday night, Kansas City Chiefs at the Giants. Travis Kelce last week had 10 fantasy points, but he cost them the ball game, dropping the ball at the 1-yard line off his hands and intercepted. But this week, a great matchup at the Giants, and this pretty much is the season here now for this Kansas City Chiefs team, where they're 0-2, and if you go to 0-3, we know the odds of making the playoffs are pretty much slim to none. So this week in a good matchup versus a Giant defense that's been getting torched the first 2 weeks of the season. Kelce a start, Theo Johnson a sit. I think he has a bright future as Theo Johnson, and last week he saw some of the flashes, run yard after catch ability and getting open in the middle of the field. But this week versus a good defense of the Kansas City Chiefs, and his targets haven't been consistent. He's a sit. And now the final game of the week, and it could be a potential high-scoring game. Detroit Lions at the Ravens. Sam Laporta start. Week 1, he had a nice ball game. Week 2, we didn't see much. 5.60 fantasy points it was for Sam Laporta. But this week on the road, they know they're going to have to put a lot of points on the board. Last week, 52-21, they ran the score up a little bit. Was this Lion team, but we know Baltimore, they could score with the best of them. So I think Laporta this week has a better game. And now to Mark Andrews. We saw this last season. He didn't do much the first 5-6 weeks of the year. And then he turned it around and he had 11 touchdowns on the season. But after 2 weeks of doing nothing, and Zay Flowers really emerging as the number one option in this passing game, even in a high-scoring potential matchup up and down the field between these two teams. After what I've seen from Andrews the first 2 weeks, pretty much non-existent in the passing game. He's a fringe option. So that's tight end starts at every matchup for week 3 of the fantasy football season.